Hey, you're back in the garage with EZGZ. Yeah. Say hi. Say hi. Say hi. That tail wagging is a hello. Hey guys, you're out in the garage with EZGZ. I had a comment in my last video. Somebody wanted a in-depth review of the Kadron, Brussels, Solex carburetor, and I happen to have a set of these Solex Kadron carburetors because they came on my Baja. It's the second set I've owned, and both of them had come on a car. I never bought these things brand new. These things are the sweetest deal. I would call these the queen of carburetors for a Volkswagen Type 1 engine. There are so many wonderful attributes to this. It's probably the most bang for your buck as far as getting drivability and horsepower out of your Volkswagen Type 1 motor. And they come in different sizes. The Venturis are changeable on the inside. You can probably put them on your car without removing the engine from the car, although it's always going to be easier to get this stock style manifold out from underneath there, because you in the engine compartment. Been there, done that. Just take it out and remove all that stuff and get this sort of set up. This works best with a mechanical advanced distributor. It's a Solex, guys. It came from Brazil, and it's a wonderful design, and they have all the best features on this thing. I can't say too much more about it. But I will. People say if they're so great, then why aren't you running them? I've run them before, and they work fine. But my background, I had several sets of Weber's and Delorto carburetors, and I prefer to run those. To me, once you deal with the challenge of having dual carburetors and have to deal with the wear and tear on the linkage in an off-road situation, then it's like, well, it's probably just as much a hassle to have the port on port as it is the dual port, one cylinder feeding two. Now, the advantages of doing, once you split this, is you can run a longer duration camshaft and your engine will run smoother. It doesn't affect, that's what everybody wants. They want extra performance, but they want it to run like stock. They want it to start on cold days. When you do get caught in traffic, they want it to be able to run slow from, stoplight to stoplight, whatever your situation is. And these give you that drivability and versatility that the 34 Pick 3 is limited to. Now, some of the smaller stock carburetors, you could remove the Venturi. People have drilled them out, they've modified them. But if you look at the design, this is a 34 Pick 3. It comes with a 26 millimeter Venturi, and you can replace the Venturis in this Kadron. And let's take a look at this. There's one other feature that this thing has right from the get-go that's kind of cool, and that is it's got this vent tube that can hook to your crankcase breather, and so the faster you're turning the engine, the harder this is pulling, and it helps evacuate pressure in your crankcase, which helps eliminate oil leaks. Unfortunately, it does have, if on an older engine, it may alter your fuel mixture, and it may be gunking up your carburetor and intake manifold a little bit. Depends on your situation. Now, it looks like there's a lot of stuff in the way here. Is there enough room for the air? There's plenty of air around this bell top to get the amount of CFM that these things are designed for. If you order a bone stock set, a pair of the dual Kadron 40 carburetors. They will come pre-jetted for a 1600 dual port, and it'll have a 28 millimeter Venturi. So you're going from a single 26 millimeter Venturi to a larger two 28 millimeter Venturis. Now, let's touch on something that's important here. When you're pulling all the air for a four-cylinder engine through one carburetor with a small Venturi like this, you have a very strong vacuum signal, and they use many different kinds of distributors. Some of them are vacuum, some of them are mechanical and vacuum. The SVDA distributor really works with the 34 pick 1, 2, and 3 series carburetors. You want probably a vacuum advance or a mechanical advance distributor with these Kadrons, because you're going to lose that vacuum signal because you've only got two cylinders pulling on it, and you've got a larger Venturi, and you're probably running a non-stock camshaft, or maybe you're putting ratio rockers on a stock camshaft and you're running a different exhaust. All that affects jetting and how much vacuum, and the spark curve is critical. If you want to get the maximum performance, you got to get that spark curve to be at the spark's got to be at the right place at the right time for the kind of fuel that you're using for maximum horsepower and best fuel economy. There's a mouthful. Now, you can buy air cleaner assemblies that don't have this, and you can move these brackets out to the side so you have two, get them out of the way, so you have less of an obstruction for airflow going down in here. Now, you've got a idle fuel needle right down here. You've got your idle jet right up here. You've got a larger diaphragm for your accelerator pump squirter, and you've got considerably more adjustability of that diaphragm down here below. People have asked me, can I take one of these and just put it on my stock manifold? No, you can't. It isn't going to work. It's physically too large. I don't know if it would clear a generator, but you're sure as heck going to have problems with an alternator, and you're going to have to make some sort of a custom intake manifold, and you're going to be going from a large bore down to a smaller bore. This is an oversized aftermarket intake manifold, claimed to give you a few more horsepower on a stock carburetor. But they also suggest at the same time that you have a bigger, freer flowing exhaust. And that's always the deal, right? You know, more fuel, more flow, little head work, bigger valves. You can go with big valve heads with the dual Kadrons. This is a neat feature right here. These have bushings instead of bearings. Some of your more expensive carburetors, like your Webers and your HPMX and your the dual IDF copycat carburetors, have ball bearings that the throttle shaft ride on. These are still using bushings. I started off with a 1776 that had 34 ICT Weber carburetors, and although they worked fine, the throttle shafts were so worn out you could hear it whistle in the car. It was in a sand car, and when you'd come up and idle, depending on what position it was in, you hear a whistling noise. But to tell you the truth, you know, those were pretty trouble-free carburetors, pretty primitive, simple carburetors, but nonetheless trouble-free. I wouldn't go run out and buy those. If you've got them, just be smile and enjoy them. But if you decide to go with something different, there are other options out there for you. And these use the same deal on the progression holes. Whoop, there they are, right there. You've got, what is it, 4 progression holes there. 3 are obvious. One of them's full of black stuff. Maybe it is just 3. It's been a long time since I looked at this stuff. But you can buy, for a fraction of the cost, It's like renewing your carburetor. What's to wear out? Maybe the accelerator pump linkage or something like that. But here's where most of your movement is, and you're getting all that replaced, including the seat for your fuel needle jet. I thought that was pretty cool. These came on my Baja, and they were pretty much wore out. I couldn't get it to idle right. Come to find out, somebody had put an electric fuel pump on that car, and they didn't use a regulator, and it had way too much fuel pressure, and it was just every time you'd hit a bump, these things were slopping. The outside of them were just covered in mud and junk. But when I looked at the car, I was able to start it and drive it, and I knew the engine didn't knock, and I went ahead and got it anyhow. I'm looking down here, as you might be, and say, what is this horn sticking out here? Well, this is a balance tube. Anytime you go to dual carburetors with these single throat type carburetors where you have two going into one, two cylinders going into one carburetor, you can still start getting this reversion type issue. But the nice thing is you don't have to deal with that manifold heat. You can run all kinds of exotic exhaust systems and headers and not have to worry about that crossover pipe that is essential when you're running any type of center mount. You put a big tube on here, like a 3/8 fuel line material, and you run this from one manifold over to the other. And when you're tuning each carburetor individually, you want to pinch that off with some vice grips or remove it and plug it. And you want to get that one carburetor tuned to these two cylinders the best way you can. Then when you've got them both where they're synchronized and they're tuned, then you hook that vacuum tube up and you can hear the difference. I can't explain why, but you can hear the difference. If you look at the head side of a stock Volkswagen intake manifold, there's a gap in between. That's probably one of the reasons why they use the metal intake gasket at that point, because there's a chance for that to cross over. Of course, once it comes out, it blends, and you still have all the reversion problems and the issues that you've got, and you've got you have a pressure change, and this is why icing occurs, because when you got that pressure change, it has a refrigeration effect. So let's look back inside. I already loosened up the top. This is basic. It's the same principle as a stock carburetor as far as the fuel inlet valve. Oop. Not the best place to set that. I got to clean these. I might give them a try. That float should look familiar if you're into Volkswagens, and it's all the same principles. Looks like there's some junk in there. That's your main jet. On a stock carburetor, they have a nut or bolt on the side so that you can access it. But if you're doing that in a tuning mode, you get all that fuel dumping out, whereas this one, you lift it off and the fuel will stay there, and you can get your screwdriver down there, get it in and out. This little device on the left is a threaded insert, and that's where your check valve is for your accelerator pump. You've got your removable venturi. You've got your main venturi for when the fuel comes in. Here's your air correction jet. Here's where your accelerator pump squirts fuel down inside there. Doesn't this look familiar? It looks more and more like an IDF or one of those bigger carbs, right? So, yeah, this thing has got some sweet virtues, and it works smooth. You got to keep in mind the progression holes. You want them to get them to lift off. They generally come with some type of a bell crank throttle system, which is another thing. It's not my favorite, and it's because I had so much trouble with the first car. The throttle linkage was worn out, and sometimes the rods would fall off. I took one of these carburetors, and I just mounted it up here so that you could see what it looks like on the car or on the engine. and you can see the eccentric. You got room, you can turn this thing under the engine compartment and it will fit. This is the linkage. It bolts to your case and it bolts to this fan screw. Do not use one of the stock style fan screws. Get you a number 6 millimeter by 1.00 thread screw. I just happen to have this Allen screw, and it was from one of my oil drain. The oil drain on the bottom of the crankcase uses studs, and you could use one of those. You could put one of those in there and put a nut in there. And be sure and use some sort of a lock washer or wave washer. You don't want this thing coming out as you're driving. Don't ask me how I know. So, but the nice thing about that is you can just take a screw off of someplace else and stick it in there, right? Because they're all over the place, right? Keep on going. So, this coil is mounted. This is for a dual carburetor setup. But the stock position, you wouldn't need this adapter. This is old school stuff, and I had duals on here, so that's why it looks like that. You would probably want to do this in a less cluttered manner, but your throttle return spring, it's not connected to the throttle shaft at the carburetor. This is your return spring. It connects to the one of the generator stand screws here. You can do any manner of things and use any kinds of springs. If you buy a new set, and I say, if you're going to go with these things and you want to be committed and you don't have a lot of shop space or experience or anything else, these dual Kadrons are the cat's meow. If you've got any of the other ones, you know, they're constantly coming out with those progressive carburetors, the 2-barrel center mount carburetors. They do make those, and I guess some people like them and get them jetted right, but there's so many different kinds because different manufacturers used them, and some of them had water heaters, some of them had electric chokes. The jetting, it's real critical for all the same things. And if you put a competition exhaust system on like this, the whole access hole here, I welded it up, but it doesn't flow enough gas back and forth to create enough heat to make that system work the way I like. But it depends on the climate. I'm in Colorado. I drive my cars even in the wintertime. We have no snow some days in the wintertime. We have like 300 days of sunshine here, and at some point, even if the day is cloudy or snowy, the sun comes out and the streets dry off because they're black, and then you're out going to the grocery store and on errands. Now, I thought about maybe getting these Kadron, that air cleaner is bad. I took these out of a box, and this thing is all smashed down, but oh well. And they do make the outerwears in the round style, which I always like to use whenever possible. And I don't necessarily want to fire this up. I've got some parts coming. This is the one I lost the valve guide in, and it went down and past the valve into the cylinder, and the piston looked a lot like this, all pounded out. I've massaged this a little bit, but I didn't like that big dimple, and I didn't have the tools or the materials to rebuild these valve guides the way they need to be and grind the seats with the new guides in it, and they're 25 years old, and it's like, hey, they're done. So I wanted to show you that because the top of the piston looks like that, and I changed the head and I looked at the piston and I thought, well, you know what, maybe I better dig a little bit deeper. So I split the case, I put in a used C25 camshaft, and I know it would work great with these dual Kadrons, because when these were on that 1600, and I believe it was the same camshaft. It had the C25 camshaft in a 1600 with these very carburetors on it, and I thought it was a 1776 or an 1835. It pulled that good. There's a few hills where I go back and forth to work when I was working, and it's like, man, you're even into the hill and it doesn't drop off. It continues on, and I thought, man, this is pretty good. So, yeah, but when I reassembled it, I ran about 2 tanks of gas through it, and I noticed it was smoking. So the piston and rings are damaged. These are the 88s. It's a 74 crank with the 88 pistons and the 90.5 heads, but I'm running the stock valve heads, and I tell you, folks, it wasn't with these carbs. It was with my dual 36s, but oh man, I liked the way it ran. It really was exciting to drive in a car like this. These Kadrons are drivers, baby, and they will work at the track. You can get more performance out of them. Most people won't need it. If you buy, they come in 2 sizes, the 40 and the 44. And as we know, the bore size here is what signifies what size it is, and you size that to the size of your engine. Probably, I would guess, if you're running a 69 millimeter crank, the 40s are the way to go. If you start getting into the strokers, then you might want to step up to the 44s, depending on what your RPM capability is and what you're using the car for. And the guys over at Caddyshack can tell you a lot better than what I can, that's for sure. But the throttle shafts on these things are bushings. And even the stock carburetors are bushings. They last 100,000 miles, right? And so if you leave the darn springs off of these things, so many people put springs, extra springs, because their car wouldn't go back down to idle. I saw this more on the off-road cars out on the sand dunes because all that dirt is banging around against it, and the wind blows and you're following people and they get grungy. You're constantly putting brake cleaner on them to keep everything working right, but stuff wears out and people put extra springs on it, and I don't recommend that. Caddyshack actually will re-drill those, and they have an upgrade bushing kit that they can put in there for you on new ones. And I wouldn't rebuild this. It's cheaper. This thing was cheap enough where just order a brand new set like I did. Put them on. This thing wouldn't idle right. It kept sucking air through the side. I don't know if I can feel it. I don't know if I can show it on the camera. I can feel it. You can see it in the side. Of course, the linkage stuff isn't in there, but you know, freshen it up, and you're back in business. You might be able to get a good deal on some used ones, you know. And these things, once I did that, it idled better and it ran better. And what happened? I built my 1800. And I turned that engine into an 1800, and I just went with carburetors, dual Delortos that I already had. So you got your fuel inlet. There's a nice little screen in here to use as a filter. Use a flow meter to synchronize your air. And they make, or if you're creative, you can make a sleeve to fit over this doggone screw here. And your flow meter will sit up here. Maybe you could do it by ear. Like I said, there's some people that have enough intuition. If it runs smooth and doesn't stumble and works the way you want it to, then good for you. If you want to try one of these, it's going to make life a lot easier. Here's an old one. This is all I had for years when I first had dual carbs. And you can adjust for the amount of flow to get the little plastic deal here to work, get in the middle where you can see it, and then you just go from side to side, but you'd still need to have that, some type of an adapter to fit on top of the carburetor there. You can get aluminum manifolds. It's easy to access your spark plugs. Yeah, try getting to these front spark plugs when you've got dual IDFs and it's in the car. So I think you might even be able to use those big fat spark plug boots too. On my bigger engines now, I find that a 34 Venturi works better. But if you take a carburetor and just start to increase the Venturi size, it will lose its vacuum strength and it'll transition in those progression ports very poorly, and you'll get more air than is capable of delivering fuel. So you got to be real careful as far as going bigger. It's almost, if you're on the borderline, buying the 44 and putting a smaller Venturi in it is going to give you better drivability than buying the 40 and putting a bigger Venturi in it. Not in every case, but if you're serious and you're thinking about these things, and they are sweet. Caddyshack. I'm not sponsored by them, but they have specialized in these Kadron Solex carburetors for decades, and they know what they're doing, and they handle all of the parts, and they can do the work. They sell the product, they drive the product, they race the product, and they know it. They know what jets to recommend for your car and cam and area that you live in. So I mean, they're the ones to go to. There's the go-to source for anything Kadron, in my humble opinion. Other people sell them, and I apologize if you feel I'm being prejudiced on that, but, you know, there's some places that just sell parts. So, at any rate, enough of this chatting. I'll give you a break on the length. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subbing. EZGZ out.